An old black man dressed in tattered clothes walked into the Grand Hotel and quietly declared, "This hotel is mine." The crowd immediately burst into mocking laughter, and security moved toward him, but as he slowly opened the worn bag on his shoulder, all laughter turned into stunned silence. The elegant lobby of the Grand Hotel buzzed with activity that morning. Well-dressed guests chatted near the marble columns, while staff in crisp uniforms moved efficiently throughout the space. The hotel stood as a landmark of luxury in the heart of Westbrook City, its reputation built over decades of catering to the wealthy and powerful. The massive glass doors swung open, drawing curious glances from those inside. A figure slowly stepped in. It was an old black man, his hair a tangled mess of silver curls, his face etched with the harsh marks of time and hardship. He wore a thick dark coat patched up in several places, covered in dust, as though it had seen countless years of wandering. His shoes were worn out, the soles frayed, and every step he took seemed slow and painful. On his shoulder was a rough, faded canvas bag that looked heavy with age. Upon seeing him, people inside the hotel immediately began whispering to each other, in low voices, their whispers mixed with soft, mocking laughter. A middle-aged white woman dressed in expensive clothes quickly pulled her purse closer to her, casting a glance that was both nervous and wary. A young hotel employee standing by the counter smirked and whispered to a colleague, "That old man must have wandered in here by mistake. What a hassle." His colleague scoffed, nodding in agreement, throwing a disdainful look at the old man. The old man continued walking quietly, his deep black eyes calm, yet resolute, seemingly unconcerned by the disdainful gazes directed at him from all directions. He slowly made his way to the center of the lobby, stopping in the heavy silence filled with both curiosity and derision from the surrounding guests. A tall security guard dressed in a neat uniform took a few steps forward. His brow furrowed as he assessed the old man with an obviously unfriendly attitude. This was Richard Miller, a burly white man known for his aggressive and impatient demeanor. He shook his head slightly, his hand resting near his belt, eyes full of disdain. The atmosphere seemed to freeze in a mix of curiosity and tension as the old man slowly stood up straight in the bustling lobby, slowly raising his eyes to scan the faces that were directed toward him. Then, in a quiet but clear voice, he broke the suffocating silence in the hotel. "This hotel is mine." His words, soft yet determined, caused the entire lobby to fall into a stunned silence, before a chorus of mocking laughter erupted, echoing throughout every corner. It seemed that Joseph Wilson, the old black man, had expected this reaction. He stood there unwavering, his gaze firm and strong, an enigmatic figure in the heart of the Grand Hotel, a place that seemed like it would never belong to him. But his appearance and declaration, though seemingly a joke, were about to stir up a storm greater than anyone could ever imagine. Joseph stood in the center of the lobby and spoke clearly again. "This hotel is mine." Immediately, the vast space inside the Grand Hotel erupted with louder, mocking laughter. At first it was faint, but it quickly spread like a wave of disdain that engulfed the poor old man. The crowd's laughter wasn't just from surprise, but also from a deep sense of contempt, as though Joseph's skin color and ragged appearance had turned him into a cheap joke in their eyes. In the corner of the room, two young receptionists, Amanda and Tyler, leaned toward each other, whispering maliciously, "This old man must be drunk. These black folks from the slums always dream these crazy fantasies," Amanda sneered. "Maybe he thinks this is the homeless shelter." Tyler responded with a condescending laugh. Their words weren't whispered softly enough to avoid Joseph's ears, but he remained still, his gaze unwavering, looking directly at the main counter where the hotel manager James Stewart stood. Stewart was a man in his 40s with neatly combed blonde hair, a typical face of a well-educated white man from Westbrook with cold light blue eyes always showing a hint of cautiousness and a touch of arrogance. Noticing the situation was drawing unnecessary attention, Stewart quickly signaled for the security guard, Richard Miller, to step forward. Richard approached Joseph with an unmistakable sneer on his face. He gestured toward the front door and spoke in a patronizing tone. "Hey, old man, this isn't a place for you to wander in and cause trouble. You'd better leave before I have to get physical." Each word carried a threatening tone, his hand resting on his belt. Joseph slowly turned to look at Richard, his gaze unflinching. There was no sign of fear on his weathered face, only an odd sense of calmness that made Richard hesitate for a few seconds. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Joseph said slowly, his voice still clear and steady enough to echo throughout the space. "I'm here to take back what's mine, something this hotel took from me over half a century ago." His strong and unwavering words once again silenced the entire lobby. James Stewart, who had initially dismissed this as a small disturbance, now felt an unusual sense of unease. He stepped out from behind the counter and approached Joseph, his demeanor polite but cold, his eyes filled with doubt and impatience. "Sir, I'm not sure what you think, but you're mistaken. This hotel has been here for decades, owned by the Westbrook family since my grandfather's time." "Perhaps you're confusing something," Stewart said clearly, trying to maintain a professional calm, but failing to hide a fleeting look of contempt in his eyes. "I'm not mistaken," Joseph replied firmly, slowly placing his old canvas bag down on the floor, as if it contained a secret that was about to turn everything upside down. "I will show you right here, right now." A few guests started to step back, exchanging glances filled with confusion and curiosity. The white guests, accustomed to the stable, wealthy life of Westbrook, seemed inconvenienced by an old, poor black man disrupting their peaceful afternoon. Meanwhile, Richard, growing increasingly impatient, stepped closer to Joseph and said sharply, "I'm warning you one last time, old man. Either you leave or I'll call the police. Don't make this worse." Joseph didn't respond immediately. He simply bent down slowly and began to open the old canvas bag, his trembling hands steady, each movement deliberate. Everyone held their breath, watching the old man's strange actions. Even Richard paused for a beat, his hand on his belt slightly, loosening, a mix of suspicion and curiosity written on his tense face. "Everything I need to say is in here," Joseph said softly but confidently, then slowly opened the bag, revealing what it had been concealing. The moment the bag opened, the entire lobby of the Grand Hotel fell into absolute silence, as those who witnessed the moment widened their eyes in shock. What Joseph had just revealed wasn't merely the nonsensical ramblings of an old, poor man. It was a truth so explosive it could potentially upend everything they thought they knew about this place. Before anyone could see what was inside, Richard Miller, the tall white security guard with a scowl, stepped forward with a distinctly aggressive demeanor. Without hesitation, he stamped his heel loudly on the marble floor, the sound intentionally breaking the silence that had spread throughout the lobby. "That's enough," Richard barked, his words coming out like an order, full of contempt. "This is a hotel, not a shelter for wandering black people causing trouble." His words echoed throughout the space, causing some of the white guests around him to nod in silent agreement, their eyes clearly reflecting deep-seated prejudices passed down through generations. The hotel employees who had been curious before now subtly took a step back, their faces showing clear discomfort. Some even whispered to each other, seemingly in tacit agreement with the harsh insult just thrown. However, Joseph remained standing there, unmoving in the face of the insults and discriminatory stares aimed at him. His weathered face remained calm, his deep black eyes unwavering, even gleaming with an unusual resolve. He slowly raised his head and looked directly at Richard, his gaze piercing enough to make Richard feel a brief twinge of unease. "I'm not causing trouble," Joseph responded, his voice still calm, clear and steady as cold steel. "I've come to reclaim what rightfully belongs to me. What you call me doesn't matter. The truth doesn't change because of insults." Richard was slightly taken aback by the steadfastness and calmness of the frail old man standing before him. He was used to using harsh words and aggressive gestures to easily make people like Joseph back down, humiliated, and escorted out. But this time, Richard clearly faced something he hadn't anticipated. The silent, unyielding strength of an old black man who seemed harmless. A small cough broke the tense air. James Stewart, the hotel manager who had been silently observing from the beginning, finally spoke, his tone polite, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Richard, please calm down," Stewart said, still looking at Joseph with a cold gaze, but no longer showing the clear contempt that the security guard had. "Sir, if you truly have any evidence, we will review it. But first, I request that you stop causing a disturbance in my hotel." Joseph gave a slight nod, then slowly bent down, his old hands carefully pulling out a worn, yellowed ledger from the bag. He slowly raised it up, letting everyone see it clearly, and his voice rang out steadily, but with weight. "This is the ledger of the Grand Hotel from 1952, the time when I founded this institution. I am Joseph H. Wilson, and I am the rightful owner of this hotel before it was stolen by greed and racial hatred." His declaration caused the lobby to fall into another heavy silence as astonished and confused glances were exchanged. Some guests, though still trying to maintain their disdainful expressions, now harbored a growing sense of curiosity and unease. Meanwhile, James Stewart suddenly turned pale, his hand trembling slightly as he heard the name Wilson echo clearly throughout the expansive space of the hotel. As for Richard, despite maintaining a tough and aggressive expression on the outside, a flicker of doubt appeared deep in his eyes. He took half a step back, his hand that had previously been resting menacingly on his belt now subconsciously lowering. It seemed Richard had just realized that the frail old black man standing before him was not simply a troublesome wanderer, as he had insulted him earlier. Joseph stood silently, holding the old ledger aloft, his gaze never leaving the now changing face of James Stewart. In that moment, he knew that he had made those who had scorned and belittled him begin to reconsider. And more importantly, the truth he brought was slowly shaking the very foundation of the world they had always believed to be stable and inviolable. In an instant, the atmosphere in the hotel shifted from one filled with contemptuous glances and mockery to one of tension and unease, as a truth was about to be revealed, a truth that had the potential to change everything. Amid the suffocating tension, Joseph stood still, lifting the old tattered book, as if it were a flag of truth that he had traded his whole life for. After what felt like an eternity, he slowly lowered the book, his aged eyes soaked with distant memories yet sharp, scanning the faces that were watching him with tension. No one spoke. No one dared move. Even breath seemed to freeze in that moment. Joseph, with a calm expression and deliberate movements, bent down and quietly placed the worn canvas bag on the marble floor. The sound it made in the absolute silence startled everyone in the hotel's lobby, causing them all to freeze, holding their breath. That bag, which just moments ago had been dismissed as the cheap belongings of an old drifter, now became the focal point of every gaze, as if it held an earth-shattering truth waiting to be revealed. Richard Miller, who had just moments ago looked at Joseph with the most contemptuous gaze, now lost the confidence he had earlier. He took a small step back, his legs moving involuntarily, as if his instincts were telling him that he had just come into contact with something uncontrollable. In that instant, the usual aggression and disdain that Richard carried were replaced by a deep sense of doubt and caution. James Stewart stood frozen, his face as rigid as stone, his eyes fixed on the bag as if he were hypnotized. Stewart, a man known for his ability to control any situation, was famous in the hotel industry for handling difficult cases with a calm and professional demeanor. But this time, it was clear that Stewart was being cornered into a situation he had never faced before. His hand unconsciously clenched, trembling slightly, as though he were afraid of what lay inside that old, tattered bag. Joseph seemed in no rush. He let the silence and tension build to its peak, slowly bending down to untie the bag's string. His gnarled, wrinkled hands, worn by years of hardship, moved with a steadiness and determination that no one could deny. As soon as the last knot was undone, Joseph slowly opened the mouth of the bag, letting its contents slowly emerge into the light of the hotel's lobby. Everyone present leaned in subconsciously, curious to see what awaited them. And then, stacks of old, faded documents slowly became visible, one bundle at a time, rolling gently out onto the cold marble floor, scattered in disarray. Each bundle clearly bore the old logo of the Grand Hotel, a symbol that had not been used for over half a century. The papers were yellowed, the edges worn, as though they had just been pulled from a long-forgotten storage vault, something even the most senior hotel employees had never seen before. An invisible chill seemed to run down the spines of everyone. In the lobby, Richard's eyes widened in shock, trying to mask the confusion that was clearly rising on his face. He cast a doubtful look at James Stewart, as if silently begging for an explanation. But Stewart, too, looked just as startled, his face visibly pale as he stared at the ancient bundles of papers. "It can't be," Stewart whispered, his voice trembling, losing the calmness he usually exuded. How do you have these documents?" Joseph didn't respond immediately. Instead, he carefully picked up one of the bundles, his aged, slender hand, gently caressing the faded paper, as though holding a precious but painful piece of memory. His eyes briefly flashed with emotion, as if for a moment he was traveling back in time to the earliest days when he founded the Grand Hotel, when he laid each brick to build it, filled with dreams and hope in 1952. "I founded this hotel with my own hands and sweat." He spoke slowly, his voice quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Every dollar, every brick beneath your feet carries my mark. But then, just because I'm black, you believed the lies and drove me out of here." Joseph's words rang out, clear, strong, filled with emotion and conviction in the lobby. The curious gazes began to shift from awe to unease and confusion. Many began to feel ashamed as they realized the harsh truth that the old man had just revealed, though some stubbornly refused to believe his story. Richard tried to regain his composure and stepped forward a little, his voice more cautious now but still full of doubt. "How do we know this isn't some kind of scam, old man? Someone like you? Where could you get this?" Joseph looked straight into Richard's eyes, his gaze so sharp it made the young security guard freeze, feeling an unexplainable sense of authority and resolve. Because I am Joseph H. Wilson, the man this very hotel stole his identity, his assets, and his life from. He paused for a moment, looking around the vast room, then continued. And now I'm here to take it all back. His words echoed through the lobby, leaving everyone stunned as they began to realize that they were witnessing the beginning of a storm that would change everything they ever knew about the Grand Hotel. A truth that could no longer be buried, as Joseph's voice faded. The vast space inside the Grand Hotel seemed to thicken, each echo of his declaration still hanging in the air, heavy with tension. Ancient documents lay scattered across the cold stone floor, each yellowed paper a haunting reminder of a forgotten past that this hotel had buried over half a century ago. All eyes were fixed on the old man, a mix of astonishment and skepticism in their gaze. The hotel manager, James Stewart, had gone pale. Though he was always confident in his ability to handle any situation, this was clearly something beyond his imagination. Confronted with these old, yet undeniable pieces of evidence, he felt the once solid foundation of power beneath him beginning to shake. Stewart quickly stepped forward, bent down, and picked up one of the old, faded documents. He stared at the worn logo imprinted on the crinkled paper, then turned to Joseph with an expression of both surprise and irritation. "You say you are Joseph H. Wilson, the original founder of the Grand Hotel in 1952. Stewart tried to maintain a calm tone, but the tremor in his voice revealed his unease. "Yes," Joseph replied briefly but firmly, his gaze old yet sharp, cutting through every doubt. "I am the one who laid the first stones to build this hotel. I spent my youth and heart to make the Grand Hotel a symbol from which you all benefit today, but it was all stolen from me simply because I am black." Stewart shook his head repeatedly, trying to deny what he had just heard. He knew that if what this old man said was true, then the entire history of the Grand Hotel, which he had always been so proud of, would be completely upended. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, and the composure he was so accustomed to was rapidly slipping away. James took a deep breath, trying to regain control of the situation, and looked at Joseph with an expression of both doubt and challenge. "What you're saying is hard to believe, Mr. Wilson. If you were the founder of this hotel, why is there no record of you in the history of the Grand Hotel? I've studied every document of this hotel, and I've never seen a name like that mentioned." Stewart's voice grew more forceful, as if clinging to the slim hope that this was all just a misunderstanding or some kind of scam. Joseph did not respond immediately. Instead, he calmly reached into his bag once again and pulled out an old, worn leather ledger with a dark brown cover, faintly imprinted with the words, "Grand Hotel Ledger, 1952. He gently flipped through the yellowed and torn pages, then stopped at a particular page where a series of signatures and handwritten notes in faded ink were recorded. "This is the first ledger of the Grand Hotel," Joseph spoke slowly, his voice deep but commanding, capturing the absolute attention of everyone present. "It has my name, Joseph H. Wilson, alongside my business partner at the time, William Westbrook. We founded this hotel together, but then greed and racism made William Westbrook turn his back on me." His voice faltered slightly, his eyes filled with the deep pain of a man who had been betrayed by someone he once trusted. He continued in a steady but emotional tone. "Westbrook couldn't accept that a black man like me could own and lead a large hotel like the Grand Hotel. So he secretly conspired with other powerful people, forged documents, and spread lies that I was incapable of running the hotel. They forced me out of the very project I had built, erased my name, and closed every door when I sought justice." Each of Joseph's words seemed like a sharp knife cutting through the veil of hidden history, causing those present in the hotel to shiver. Some guests lowered their heads, feeling ashamed as they realized the injustice the old man had endured, while others remained skeptical, whispering to one another about the truth of his story. Richard Miller, who had always maintained an aggressive attitude, now couldn't deny the seriousness in the old man's words. His gaze had lost its initial confidence, replaced by confusion and doubt. He quietly looked to Stewart, waiting for orders or direction from his superior. James Stewart, still, gripping the old ledger tightly, nervously flipped through the pages, his anxiety growing with each turn. His heart raced as he clearly saw Joseph H. Wilson's signature on the first few lines about the hotel's history. The words that seemed to have been dormant in the past now awakened with force, placing Stewart in a situation he could no longer deny. "It can't be," Stewart mumbled, his voice trembling with despair as he tried to deny what he was seeing. But the more he tried to deny it, the clearer it became that each old page was undeniable evidence of a deep, systemic injustice that had taken place more than 50 years ago. In the midst of the crushing tension, Joseph stood tall, his eyes bright and unwavering, as if he had never been defeated. He knew he had accomplished the impossible. The truth was starting to speak, and this time, no one could stop it. For him, this was just the first step in a long journey to reclaim the justice that had been lost so long ago. As James Stewart stood there, his trembling hand flipping through the yellowed pages, his eyes fixed on the signature and familiar handwriting of a past that seemed to have completely disappeared from this world, Joseph let out a quiet sigh, his gaze shifting toward the large window of the Grand Hotel, as if old memories suddenly rushed back, vivid and sharp, painfully clear. He quietly placed the ledger on the table, his bony fingers still trembling, not from fear but from the emotion of remembering those bitter, distant days. The vast hotel room sank into deep silence, all eyes fixed on the old man, as if waiting for the next part of the story, a truth that had been buried beneath the weight of greed and social prejudice for over half a century. Joseph slowly lifted his head, his eyes still full of life but also hiding the pain, disappointment, and wounds that had never healed. He spoke, his voice gentle but resonant, carrying the deep sorrow of a life once betrayed. In 1952, William Westbrook and I started building this hotel from nothing. Back then, society still had many barriers for black people like me, but that didn't discourage me. I poured my heart, my youth, and my dreams into every brick, every stone that made up this hotel, hoping the Grand Hotel would become a symbol of fairness and prosperity. His voice slightly cracked, as if each memory tightened his throat, but Joseph continued his story with the resolve of someone who had lived through and witnessed each event. William Westbrook was my closest partner at first. I trusted him unconditionally. I never imagined that greed and social prejudice could change a person so quickly, but what I couldn't foresee was that the very friend who had stood by my side would become the one to conspire to take everything from me. The people in the hotel started to murmur among themselves, their faces a mix of confusion and sympathy. Even Richard Miller, who was usually aggressive, fell into an unusual silence, as if reflecting on Joseph's strong and sincere words that no one could ignore. Joseph paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the faces that were intently watching him, then continued speaking slowly, as if each word needed to be remembered deeply. "One day I will never forget William secretly colluded with a group of powerful white shareholders, convincing them that a black man couldn't run a hotel effectively. He used the most despicable reasons, leveraging my skin color to build a lie, claiming that I wasn't competent and that my presence would harm the hotel's reputation." He took a deep breath, trying to remain calm before continuing. They quickly united and ousted me from the board using shady legal tactics. I tried to seek justice. I took all the evidence to court, pleading from one courtroom to the next, from one lawyer to another. But at that time, people like me, people of color, never had a voice in that biased society. By now, Joseph's voice quivered, his eyes filled with unshed tears that didn't fall. It seemed as though he was reliving the most painful days of his life, when every door to justice slammed shut before him simply because of his skin color, even though he held all the undeniable evidence of the truth. I went everywhere, from local governments to higher courts, presenting the irrefutable evidence again and again. But all I received in return was indifference, coldness, or even contempt. One judge even coldly looked at me and said, "You should know your place. How could a black man ever run a hotel?" The guests standing in the hotel became still with emotion and confusion. A few lowered their heads in shame, realizing that the history they were witnessing was indeed cruel beyond belief. James Stewart seemed frozen in place, his face now completely losing the arrogance it once held. It was as if he was finally seeing the grave injustice of the past that he had unknowingly inherited. Joseph took another deep breath, trying to keep his composure. His eyes brimmed with emotion, but his voice grew sharper, stronger than ever as he continued. In the end, I was left with nothing. Not only did I lose the hotel I had dedicated my life to building, but I also lost my dignity and career. They wiped my name from every record, erasing me from existence as if I had never been here. He paused again, his deep gaze fixed on James, Stewart and Richard Miller, as if trying to pierce their souls. "And now I've returned, not for revenge, but to force you to face the truth. You must understand that every brick, every dollar, every breath of this hotel came from my sacrifice and loss." Joseph's words reverberated powerfully in the thick silence. Everyone understood that the truth he had just revealed was not just the story of one man, but the deep pain, the stain in history that they had purposely chosen to forget. In that moment, Joseph stood there, resilient and unbowed, not just as an old man in poverty, but as the living symbol of the fight against injustice, prejudice, and greed that history had once buried. But now he had returned, and this time he would not allow anyone to erase him again.